Hey, I know this is really late and I'm worn out and tired and but I'm going to do another book reading of the biographical material in my book. I wanted it to be about half biographical material of typists and half like, well, also covering the typing history and mechanics, but I also want to talk about the personalities behind the typists too, in the same vein as a lot of the books I liked, like Stephen Fatz's Word Freak about Tournament Scrabble and um, Ken Jennings' Brainiac about trivia culture. I wanted this to be that sort of book, so I want to go into biographical material as well. And I wrote 3 chapters about myself, and I'm going to be reading from the first of these. And I've got this shirt from the New York State Fair from 1997 when I was 12 years old, um, as like a throwback for this occasion. Um, I'm getting worn out doing all these videos, and I may not make it the entire month. I already should have been in bed now because I probably have to go to the grocery store tomorrow, and it's obviously better if I do that early due to the coronavirus, but it looks like I'm not going to do that. I've gotten myself way out of whack. I used to be so good about going to bed really early. Like back when I was in elementary school, I would yell at my parents if they put me to bed later than 7 o'clock, which, well, I must have been the only kid like that, but I'll talk about um, more than that in a bit. Anyway, I did this so late because I was doing some work for my Patreon subscribers, and Keegan was my very first subscriber, so analyzing all of his races, it took me a while to download them, and then because Keegan has so many races, um, the files corrupted a couple of times, and I had to start over, and it took me a bunch of hours to finally get Keegan's races, although today, in a long day, I almost completed, hey guys, I almost completed analyzing all of Keegan's races to calculate his fastest words and keystrokes. I've already done that. The only thing I didn't finish for Keegan was doing a write-up for him and calculating his speed distribution over various parts of a race. And I'm going to go through all of my Patreon Gold subscribers after that over time. Mako and Terran I've already mostly analyzed because I have all their races through December 31st, and I don't think either of them have done that many races since then, so those should be quicker. But yeah, I'm going to go through all my Patreon Gold subscribers' races, and I hopefully want to do some writing. I am burning out on the videos, and I may not make it the whole month, but I still wanted to do this because I committed to do this. What else? There was something I was thinking of saying here. Yeah, I wore my voice out a lot because I read another chapter. The chapter I just released, I read it to, well, most of it to Michael DeRoche on the phone last night. I also have been dehydrated because I keep forgetting to drink enough water over the weekend. I'm totally out of it, and you can hear it in the scratchiness of my throat. I mean, I don't think I have the coronavirus. I think it's just my regular stuff, but I get so neurotic about it. Um, Okay, Panda Culture, I'll answer your question first before I get to the reading. Hey, furry. Another reason I wanted to do a live stream was because since I started making my recordings Patreon exclusive a few days ago for the first day before I make them public the next day, I started getting a lot fewer visitors and a lot fewer hits than I was getting on the previous videos, so it seems like that may have been a mistake, making those Patreon exclusive. Because it seems like your videos don't get promoted as much if you release them a considerable time after you've completed them. Um, I mainly use membrane keyboards, and it's mainly because of cost. If I had the money to spend on mechanical keyboards, there would be many better uses for them. Panda culture, I guess it depends on when you started. When you started typing. If you only started typing like a month ago and you already got that fast, maybe you can consider to accelerate. But I think that if you've been at this a while, like a couple of years or something, I don't think it's possible to gain that much speed that fast. It sort of depends on how long you've been touch typing. Obviously, you'll have a faster ascent if you just started than if you've been at this a while. Hand or arm trouble from typing? No. Um, 1.5 months ago, it might be. Yeah, I got it the first time. It might be possible, but I would guess not, especially since whoever you're competing against will also likely be improving as well. Alright, the general advice I've been giving lately is focusing on centering your fingers around the most frequently used letters in English if you have a QWERTY keyboard. If you have a Colmac or Dvorak keyboard, you should, if you have a Colmac or Dvorak keyboard, you should just use the center row because that's what they're designed for. But if you have a QWERTY, you should center your fingers around the most frequently used letters, which would be some combination of A, S, E, R, H, N, I, O. I'm not playing anything now. I am I'm here to do a reading, not a Q&A, although if you want me to do a Q&A on a later one of these videos, perhaps. Yeah, Vishy, I just said a couple minutes ago that I've been going through Keegan's races, and you know how long that takes, although I did pretty much finish analyzing Keegan, and I imagine anybody else will go faster unless Word Racer subscribes to me, or that Mark guy. I'm sorry, Song Plague, I'm too drained. I know how persistent Nitro Types fans are. Alright, you probably convinced me to... I did make a Nitro Type video recently. Look up Typing Potpourri. The Typing Potpourri video has some Nitro Type on it, which was the first Nitro Type I recorded in years. You've maybe convinced me to do another one. No, Panda, you're not really disturbing the flow. I haven't really started yet. I promised everyone if they subscribed to me and did a Patreon Gold membership, I'd analyze their typeracer account and calculate their fastest keystrokes and words. And yes, I'm doing that for Keegan. If I do that for Keegan, I'll do that for everyone. Okay, the title of my chapter is The Special Ed Whiz-Kid. Yes, I was simultaneously this academic superstar and also in the special ed classes at my elementary school. And my chapter quote for this chapter is a type racer quote that many of you have probably raced on. Scratch the surface of any champion in any individual sport, and you're often going to find an obsessed misfit who's deficient in many parts of his life because he devotes 8 hours a day to it. That was John D. Williams, the then president of the National Scrabble Association, which was later replaced by the North American Scrabble Players Association, an organization run by the players themselves instead of by Hasbro officials. It was a quote from the book Word Freak by Stefan Fatsis, which was the biggest influence on my own book, probably. Um, and I thought it was funny and the best line in the book, and that's why I added it as a type racer quote also. Um, what type of keyboards do you use? All right, you're talking about Dvorak. I use QWERTY and have no interest in learning an alternative layout. Dvorak is probably easier to gain speed on quickly, especially if you are a home row typist. Um, because Colmac and Dvorak were designed for home row while QWERTY was not. That's not saying you can't be fast on home row on QWERTY. There are people who are, like Kathy and Taryn, um, but it's harder to be fast on home row on QWERTY. So if you want to do home row, I'd probably recommend another layout. Um, but layout doesn't matter. I don't think layout matters that much, but you shouldn't try to change midstream, I'd say, or keep switching back and forth because you'll blunt your momentum either way, I think. Um, okay, now I'm going to go back to the start of my biographical chapter of my book. Most people grow up believing their personal experiences are ordinary and normal simply because they have nothing else to compare them to. When I taught myself to touch type at around 3 years old, I had no idea that I would eventually become the most famous typist of the internet age. I was so isolated from my peers that I had no idea this was unusual at all. Like most of the other great millennial typists, I stumbled upon the online competitive typing scene accidentally, having no idea any of this existed, and was truly startled by the fact that I would become partially responsible for increasing its popularity single-handedly. My cultural influence within this very bizarre niche was something I neither desired nor courted, but reluctantly came to terms with over time, but it never stopped feeling weird. My mom had dreamt of becoming a nurse from her early childhood, but after being bullied by her professors, she dropped out of nursing school and moved to New York City in the late hippie years. She had taken typing in her high school years, which gave her a fallback position, and she had a string of secretarial and/or typing jobs in the 70s and 80s. She herself was regarded as the fastest civil service typist in Syracuse long before I was born. Her favorite job was when she worked as the secretary of the music department at Onondaga Community College. She had been a first-chair viola player in high school when she lived in the Hudson Valley, and music was one of her passions throughout her life. She studied piano at OCC and electric guitar in the 90s after becoming disabled. While at OCC, she was allowed to go to school for free, and she ambitiously decided to double major in both music and computer science. Although music was her passion, she knew it was difficult to earn a living in that field. Her brother, who would eventually become the chief assistant to the head of the Department of Computer Science at the University of Maryland, encouraged her to major in computer science for future career opportunities. She was extremely busy in this period as she was working full-time on top of her intense course load, and she was also writing an opera based on the Rachel Maddox fantasy novel The Green Kingdom, which film director Francis Ford Coppola was briefly interested in adapting, and helping manage a local Syracuse progressive rock band named Air. However, it all came that's Air, A-I-R-E, by the way. However, it all came crashing down for her in 1983 when she got the flu for 6 weeks and never truly recovered. She had already had an undiagnosed case of multiple sclerosis for several years, but unlike Stella Pajunas, the 1946 international typing champion who set the 1 minute record for typing on an electric typewriter of 216 words per minute, she did not have the good fortune to be married to a local captain of industry. She was fired by OCC because she had taken too much sick time and was forced to drop out of college as well. Even though she had accumulated nearly 4 years of college credit in her 2 stints in community college, she dropped out of college just prior to getting her associate's degree. I only talk about my parents for a couple pages. I'll see what else. Napkin, it's fine. I didn't announce it in the Type Racer Discord. I've been trying to be quieter in there because I know people want to talk to me a lot, and if I want to talk, I create content. The DOS keyboards were fine. I mean, all keyboards were out in the end. They probably lasted longer. I'm not sure they lasted enough times longer to be worth the increase in price. Um, okay, going back. My dad was the son of the head of the union for Niagara Mohawk, one of the largest electricity companies in upstate New York. Although he had been his high school's chess champion and went on to become one of the best backgammon and darts players in Syracuse, he underachieved as a high school and college student and also dropped out of college. In the 80s, he had a string of odd jobs, including working at the Syracuse University bookstore alongside his best friend, who at the time was Air's keyboardist and my mom's boyfriend, doing advocacy work for the Syracuse Peace Council and working at a pet farm in Northern Virginia. After my parents' marriage, he took vocational courses in electrical engineering in the late 80s, which landed him at jobs as an operator of AS400 mainframe computers for the rest of my childhood. Later on, he wrote a general theory of human behavior to summarize his thoughts on human psychology, where he coined the concept of a behavioral transaction, which he viewed as the underlying building block of human behavior in the same way that the atom is the building block of matter. My parents met at an anti-intercontinental ballistic missile rally in the mid-80s and moved to the Washington, D.C. suburbs in Virginia shortly thereafter. My dad was unemployed and moved in with his mother, while my mom had few options as she was now broke and usually too sick to work, but she did anyway. It didn't help that numerous doctors told her there was nothing wrong with her simply because nobody in Syracuse had the proper equipment to diagnose multiple sclerosis at the time. Additionally, 6 doctors told her that she could never get pregnant because she had too much testosterone, but they were wrong, as I was born nonetheless in Fairfax Hospital in Virginia on March 24, 1985. My mom had written poetry using the pseudonym Sean Patrick while in New York City, and she knew that that was the name she wanted to use if she had a boy. However, she eventually chose the middle name Padraic, Padraic, a more ethnically Irish variant, as my actual middle name. My dad himself had been sometimes nicknamed Sean in his youth, so he was fine with it. My parents returned to Syracuse when I was 1 year old, and I have lived in upstate New York ever since. Although my mom had tried to work even during her pregnancy and after I was born, she no longer had the stamina to do so, particularly after the MS caused her to have dozens of seizures, sometimes hundreds most days. While trying to find resources on epilepsy in the Syracuse area, she accidentally ended up running the Epilepsy Association of Central New York, ECNY, serving as its president and editor of its monthly newsletter. My dad was vice president. However, most days she was bedridden and could not leave our apartment. My dad also tended to be a homebody, so I largely spent my entire childhood indoors, causing me to develop freakish talents in a wide variety of academic or quasi-academic areas, while I simultaneously spent basically no time doing any of the things that would have been seen as normal, in quotes, childhood activities at the time. This led me to become quite possibly the nerdiest graduate in the history of my high school when considering the difference between how strong my academic skills were and how weak my skills were at anything non-academic. And that's it about my parents. What's funny is I honestly don't enjoy typing that much, anywhere near as much as most of my fans do. It's really my fans who who get me into it more than I ever honestly was. I prefer reading stuff and creative stuff more these days. I wasn't good enough to be a computer science major at Cornell. I probably would have been good enough at a lot of other colleges, but I got a C plus in my introductory class, and that was in my sophomore year, and that was basically too late, and that was basically it for me. Um, I it's clearly more important to get it would clearly be better to get a more valued major at a lesser college than a less valued major at a greater college. Um, I'm not done with the reading. I'm reading more. But yeah, there were a lot of people who had a lot more experience that they picked up on their own programming. I mean, the great programmers are people who pick up stuff on their own. I, I, I had a lot of talents that I did pick up on my own too, but um, it was more like statistical analysis, collecting data. I didn't do much programming by myself. I did some. I made websites and stuff, but they were crude, and and the websites I make still are crude. I have some programming talent, but I wasn't a good enough major for computer science at Cornell. But the courses I did take there were valuable in making some of my websites and doing some of my statistical analyses for this book, actually. Oh yeah, hi Rohit. I assumed you'd be Rohit Singh everywhere, like you are everywhere. I became a fast typist because I taught myself when I was 3, and I'm gonna get there in this. I never took I never took a typing class in school. I don't know that my school even had typing classes. I taught myself at home. My other hobbies, historically, playing Scrabble. I'm an expert rated Scrabble player. Um, I've been heavily into auto racing. It was primarily NASCAR as a kid. It has been more IndyCar in recent years, and I love collecting statistics on basically everything. What I've collected statistics on the most is auto racing. I mean, I made my websites race-database.com and racermetrics.com where I did hardcore statistical collection and data entry and also analysis of racing. I have tried to do basically sabermetrics for auto racing. I'm one of several people doing that, and it hasn't really taken off. I have a few fans of that, but people care much more about me as a typist. In fact, I was planning a racermetrics book, and I was trying to decide whether I wanted to do that first or I wanted to do this first, and I decided I want to do this first because this is what I'm famous for, and I do enjoy both of them. Um, I joined typing competitions accidentally because one of my high school classmates, Jordan Knott, who himself was briefly famous when he was kicked out of his college for seeking mental health services when he got depressed after one of his roommates committed suicide, if I remember the story correctly. He sued his college and won, and that made headlines. But anyway, he was one of my high school classmates and Facebook friends, and he linked in a Facebook application called Facebook Typing Speed, and I went on it, and I suddenly found myself dominating it or alternating with Jelani Nelson. I was puzzled. I knew I typed faster than anybody I'd ever met, but I didn't know many people, so I figured in the abstract there were tons of people who were faster, but apparently not. Um, oh, I'm just alternating between using Microsoft Word and or a Google document that is entirely private. Read only except for Izzy. Izzy has access to it at the moment, but nobody else does. Right now I'm reading from the Google document. Um, Song Plague. Oh, you said I don't know if you're fast for an 11-year-old because you didn't say what your speed was. Um, okay, I'm using. I always forget. I always have to lift the keyboard up and look. I'm using a Logitech K270. 152 words per minute is faster than I was at age 11. I mean, I figure that there are going to be a bunch of Zoomers who are going to overtake me eventually. I'm honestly surprised there's been no Zoomer who has overtaken me yet. I mean, it looked like Czech was going to, but then he kind of stopped caring. Um, somebody from the next generation, like Alpha Panda or Czech or Terran or VL or somebody I don't even know yet is probably going to surpass me. Maybe Bailey, but yeah, I mean, there are probably lots of people who are typing at age 3 now, but it was not common in the 80s. I'm going back to reading. Although I have an autism spectrum disorder, this went undiagnosed until 2014 because most people in the wake of Rain Man believed only people at the level of institutionalization were truly autistic, as this was before the autism spectrum entered popular consciousness. I had an absurd penchant for precision, which manifested itself in such instances as my bedtime, where I would actually scream at my parents if they put me to bed even a minute after my scheduled 7 o'clock bedtime on school nights, and at my kindergarten evaluation, which I nearly failed. Unable to decide whether the color I was shown was red-orange or orange-red, I chose to say nothing, apparently causing the evaluators to think I was unable to speak. Additionally, I could not cross my legs in an Indian-style position, which we were expected to do in elementary school, and for some reason this was considered borderline pathological even though it has no real importance in everyday life. All my gross and fine motor skills were essentially non-existent except for typing. I had horrible penmanship and cursive writing ability and was unable to even grip a pen or pencil properly for a few years. Usually I would argue with my teachers and say, "Why write when I can type?" which was likely as obnoxious as it was prescient. I similarly failed to learn many other normal in quotes tasks in this period. For instance, I never to this day have learned how to ride a bike, blow my nose, or whistle. See, can't do it. On our second grade class's physical fitness test, I ranked at the 0th percentile on 3 of the 6 assessments: shuttle run, flex arm hang, and the 50-yard dash, the 1st percentile on 2, sit-ups in the 300-yard run, and the 6th percentile at my, in quotes, best task, which was the long jump. Unlike many of the other great typists, I had almost no musical training. I was in the chorus every year from 3rd to 8th grade, but that was it. My mom had an electric keyboard which I'd goof around on for a few minutes a couple times a year, but I was no piano player. My sole instrument was the computer keyboard. Even in later years, my incompetence in anything requiring motor skills continued, including art, gyms, shop, home ec, and even science labs. I used to say that I couldn't understand the stereotype that people who were good at doing science labs would be bad at gym because they both required physical motor skills. At least I bucked the trend by being bad at both. At least I was consistent, going back to the. Yeah, I've used a mechanical keyboard, but it's been years. Improve speed by focusing on um, practicing letter combinations and um, spend a lot of time looking up the most frequent letters and the most frequent groups of 2 letters and focus on practicing those. Don't follow home road training and practice the F and the J. Those letters don't come up very much. Practice the most frequently used letters in the English language, which are E, T, A, O, I, N, S, H, R, D, I think in that order. Um, Havel, Hostess. I'm not typing because I'm not typing because I'm alternating between typing videos on the odd days and non-typing videos on the even days. I'm considering this a non-typing video for the even day, even though I know it is technically April 19th where I am. Yeah, I mean, different people feel differently about different keyboards. There's not really a consensus. I think there, I think Napkin is a little wrong there. I think there may be some keyboards that have better latency time, which can give you minor effects like how well you can duplicate letters. But yeah, that's a pretty minor part of typing. All right, I'm gonna skip the next paragraph because that's a little too personal. I might want to cut it. Even beyond anything mentioned so far, my biggest adverse eccentricity without a doubt was my eating habits. While I ate pretty much everything until I was 1, I abruptly stopped eating all solid food and reverted to formula shortly thereafter. Still on formula and not potty trained at almost age 4, I was almost not allowed to enter preschool, but I did eventually move on to solid food. I must be the only person in the history of the world who learned to touch type before being potty trained. Unfortunately, I ended up likely having one of the worst extended diets in human history. For basically my entire childhood, I ate practically the same diet with almost no variations. For breakfast, I ate Freihofer's Canadian oat bread or Pepperidge Farm cinnamon bread with a Flintstones vitamin and a box of cherry juicy juice. For dinner on weekdays, I ate a Tony's frozen pizza, either cheese or sausage and pepperoni. For lunch, I would eat school pizza, hash browns, French toast, or chicken nuggets when available, and chicken nuggets for dinner on the days I ate pizza for lunch. But other than that, I always ate 2 Pop-Tarts, a cracker and cheese pack, and chocolate milk for lunch or chicken nuggets in the summer. On weekends, I would have 6 slices of Domino's sausage and pepperoni pizza at my dad's apartment on Saturday, and 4 on Sunday, eating either Kraft macaroni and cheese or nothing for Saturday night dinner, and chicken tenders from Burger King on Sunday night on my way home to my mom's. I also ate 2 1-pound boxes of Cheez-Its a week and drank 2 glasses of soda almost every night. Somehow I did not have a coronary as a teenager. I wasn't even really unhealthy, although there was no good reason for that to be the case. That basically was around 95% of what I ate in my entire childhood. This is now actually considered a legitimate eating disorder, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, ARFID, but wasn't at the time. Whenever I tried to expand my diet, most of the time I gagged and was completely unable to swallow whatever foreign substance I was trying to eat. Turkey, corn, soup, even unbreaded chicken. Perversely, I even seemed to take this extreme eccentricity as a source of pride as a child, introducing myself by saying, "Hi, I'm Sean Rona and I'm a picky eater." Yes, I get more personal than one might imagine. When I entered my elementary school, I spent over half my time in basically every special education course that my school district offered. Occupational therapy, physical therapy, adaptive physical education, speech therapy because I had a heavy speech impediment at the time, resource and counseling. I also rode a special ed school bus because students shoved me on the regular buses. I arrived at school with 2400 vision and was nearly blind in my left eye with an extreme astigmatism, but managed to raise that to 2070 after wearing an eye patch nearly non-stop despite much resistance on my part. Okay, it's my cat in the background. Most days I spent half my time in regular classes and half my time in special ed classes, but I was advanced enough academically that it never really affected my grades and I usually got straight A's. Eventually I was mainstreamed in 5th and 6th grade, although I continued to have counseling a few years longer. I was not and would never become normal in quotes, but my high school, it seemed like my academic successes were overriding my deficiencies in other areas. Alright, I'll go back to the chat. Panda culture, what are you talking about on the personal chat? Are you talking about a YouTube video, a Zoom video? I've never even used Zoom. I've only even heard of it in like the last couple weeks because of the coronavirus, honestly. I had never heard of Zoom before, but a personal chat where and about what? I mean, I'd certainly consider doing that. Um, Hunt and peck typing. It's it's not good, but I mean, I think there are a lot of better things to focus your time on than typing unless you really enjoy it, which most of my viewers do. Do you use alt codes? Oh, you mean like this stuff where you can draw the heart, diamond. Did I just lose the stream? It counted as a back button, I guess. Did I just lose the stream? I did not lose the stream. I just changed pages. But it's going to take a while to see the chat again. Um, all right. I'll show you in the chat. Yes, I like to use alt codes, and 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 one of the things I loved doing was like drawing boxes with them. Watch and see. This worked better in this worked better in things that were text-based. You could actually get the boxes to work. If that's what you mean by alt codes, sure, I was into that stuff when I was a kid. They were cool. I literally gag healthy food. I mean, I'm trying to do better. I eat a banana every day. I'm eating nuts every day. I'm eating oatmeal more and toast less. I'm eating strawberries. I'm doing a little better, but I've improved modestly. I'm also making my own pizzas instead of or starting that instead of the frozen pizzas. So I mean, I've gotten a little better, but still bad enough that it's affecting me now. Yes, I've always had cats throughout my life. I have two cats now. We just got them last September, about a year and a half after our last cat died. Um, yeah, I don't really care about shaving. I was always a nerd. I was social distancing long before it was cool. Unfortunately, I still have to go into work, and I'm so afraid. But they're doing a great job there. I mean, they've assigned us all masks. I'm sitting 2 seats away from anybody. I don't think. I think I'm gonna make it through. Um, yeah, I noticed that the typing potpourri video did get more views than most of the others. It looks like Nitro Tape does have the most passionate fan base, so yeah, I'm probably gonna have to do more there, even though there are other sites I like more. Um, yes, I've taken vitamins most days throughout my life. Okay, panda culture. I do I do have Skype, so I could use that. Yeah, I was thinking about doing a video along with similar to my um, those videos with the nerdity test and the autism test where I was going to talk about my eating disorder. I'm probably not going to go more into it than that. I work in a call center for the deaf and hard of hearing. I'm planning on staying here for 10 years until um, I qualify for public service loan forgiveness to pay off my student loans. I'm not playing Nitro Tape tonight. I'm not doing any typing tonight. I'm going to bed after this and I'm reading. Communication service for the deaf. I had to sign a confidentiality agreement, so I'm not going to say any more about it than that. I'm going back to reading. When I was 6, my parents separated and they divorced a year and a half later. Afterward, I lived with my mom on weekdays and my dad on weekends. Mom had just been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis but had not yet been approved for Social Security disability. So for that first year after the separation, we were flat broke, not even having enough money for cleaning products. We had no television, but I made do by placing an antenna on my old computer monitor and watched TV shows that way when that was still possible. In a very O. Henry-esque anecdote, some people at my elementary school were collecting money for Thanksgiving for the poor, and I begged my mom to give anything. She did, even though we had very little at the time before I realized that we were one of the families that eventually received help. Although Mom eventually stopped having seizures entirely, her MS was still very bad. She tried an experimental MS medication called COP1 that was eventually approved as Copaxone, but had several drug reactions to it and stopped breathing once on Mother's Day weekend when I was 12. I called 911 when she wasn't able to speak, probably saving her life. I watched Mom have constant reactions to all sorts of drugs that you weren't supposed to get reactions to, and I myself inherited this to some degree as I was allergic to every antibiotic my doctor prescribed except one, and saw her get abused by numerous medical professionals who frequently gave her ultimatums where they would either force drugs on her or otherwise stop seeing her. Those people had no sympathy for the idea that drug reactions even exist. In my case, I believe it is probably connected to my autism since autists generally have greater sensitivity to most things than the neurotypical population. Okay, skipping a couple paragraphs. 5'8" about. Um, yeah, working in a call center with the I yeah, I have to work. Actually, I'm not sure if by my confidentiality agreement I'm allowed to say more than that to explain why, so I'm going to refrain from doing so. My parents were both very early on the computer bandwagon, and even when we didn't have a lot of money, we always had computers at home from the late 80s onward. They had done volunteer work in Virginia for the Northern Virginia Apple Users Group, but switched to IBM-compatible DOS computers by the time I was conscious. My parents owned a manual for DOS PCs that I practically gutted, and I learned how to use almost all the DOS commands by the time I was 4. I memorized all the codes to type ASCII characters, such as the accented foreign characters, degree sign, division sign, smiley faces, and characters for typing boxes and other geometrical objects, many of which I still remember today. I created large directory structures, wrote batch files, and wildly experimented in all sorts of ways, such as deleting the most important DOS system files, command.com and config.sys, just to see what would happen, and I even deleted my mom's ICNI membership database. My parents were both concerned that in my zeal for experimentation that I would attempt to format the hard drive, so they renamed format.com to, drumroll please, 5mat. Although I did not get the pun, I was so obsessed that I had memorized all the dates, times, and file sizes for the core DOS application, so I figured it out quickly. By that point, I had enough sense not to format the hard drive. Wanting to distract me from my tendency to mutilate operating systems, my parents installed a lot of games for me to play. Some were educational, School Mom, PC USA, PC Atlas, Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, and some were not. Yahtzee, Big Rig, Wheel of Fortune, and Jeopardy, but at about this time when I was either 3 or 4 years old, they installed a typing game called CPT Personal Touch Typing. Although now obscure, it was one of the earlier DOS typing games coming out in 1985, 2 years before the much more famous Mavis Beacon application. CPT was a word processor manufacturer out of Minnesota that apparently was trying to hedge its bets and offer computer software in case PCs overtook word processors in the marketplace. While that did happen, the software applications were not enough to save the company, and it went out of business in 1993. However, the program left a deep impression on me. By the time I had my first computer with Windows 95 on it, I stopped using the CPT program and most DOS programs, but I continued to improve nonetheless. Teachers at my elementary school did have me type the entirety of a poetry book consisting of all the second grade students' poems, including my own, and I typed the entirety of an 11-page handwritten paper for a classmate who was ill when we were in 6th grade. Although I wasn't a very literary person growing up by any means, as I basically never consumed mature fiction outside of class, I also was the co-editor-in-chief of Horizons Literary Magazine in junior high school and typed over half the pieces in it in both my 8th and 9th grade years. Those were pretty much the only real-world applications for my typing at the time. My dad did install a Windows-based typing application when I was about 16 and I used it frequently. Neither of us remember what it was called, but I do know that the game seemed to max out at 199 words per minute and did not allow speeds faster than that, and I definitely got 199 words per minute frequently enough that I must have already been hitting 200, so it seems the majority of my improvement came between when I was 10 and 16 and wasn't even trying to improve. Back to the chat. I'm not much interested in keyboard mechanics, to be honest, although I force myself to learn stuff to answer people's questions. But there are a lot of people who know a lot more about that stuff than I do. Um, I think it's better to only use one thumb for the spacebar, and it's better to use the right thumb only for the spacebar, unless you're left-handed. If you're left-handed, then maybe the left thumb is better. Yeah, I mean, I certainly remember the Dell Stardust Star days. I mean, I didn't do that much damage. I don't think I mentioned this, but I also dipped my scientific calculator in a glass of soda to see what would happen, and it did not work anymore. I was seemingly like going to become a budding hacker or something, and then I just entirely lost interest. I never really perceived myself as a hacker. Yeah, people should be going to bed. I should have been in bed hours ago. Going back to the... I mean, I think Czech and I still talk in other Discords other than the main one. Izzy and Keegan are also faster on other characters than they are in the spacebar. Keegan is second fastest on the spacebar, and Izzy was like 10th fastest on the spacebar. Izzy was one of the slowest spacers among all the fast typists, actually. The CPT game was not too exciting by modern standards. Either you typed drills consisting of words in which all characters appeared on a single row of the keyboard, typed short four-line passages containing all or most of the letters on the keyboard, or typed letters as they fell down the screen. The game did have markings to show which finger you were supposed to use to type each key, but I didn't pay too much attention to them. It did not take me very long to memorize the entire keyboard and have it fully mapped out in my head. Perhaps because I learned this so early, I never needed to use the home row method as a crutch, which allowed me to somehow develop the ability to learn to type each key with a number of different fingers. Because my training was entirely self-driven, I also never learned what my correct posture should be. While typists like Albert Tangora and Margaret Owen had strict and precise rules for the way you should be seated and where every single finger should rest at all times, I seemed to violate every single one of the established rules, but it never affected my speed. Especially in my preteen and teen years and from then ever after, I would sit in front of the computer in all sorts of warped positions. Frequently I would sit a leg upon the top of my desk or on a lower leaning shelf. Sometimes I typed with both legs on top of the chair with one lying on top of another. Other times I typed with one of my legs wrapped around my arm. I even occasionally typed while lying on the floor and stretching my arms at a 45-degree angle from the floor to the keyboard surface, and I have a picture of that, which you might have seen in an earlier recording. I don't really remember very much about this game, but I did save two printouts from it, indicating that I typed 83 words per minute when I was 6 years old, and 108 words per minute when I was 10, which I believe was the first time I broke 100 words per minute. By the time I was a preteen, I was already a faster typist than my mom. What's perhaps even more astonishing is that I never really considered typing to be my main hobby or anything. It was just one of many obsessions I had, but never something I spent very much time thinking about, and not what I had the most fun doing. It was only upon discovering the online competitive typing scene decades later that I eventually acknowledged its place in my life. I think Czech is even less interested in typing than I am, which is why he hasn't fully overtaken me yet. I was probably even more into math than I was into computing. While messing around with my mom's old scientific calculator, I pressed all the buttons endlessly to see what the value of each function produced, particularly for 0 and 1. I memorized all the powers of 2 from 2 to 67,108,664, which I can still recite to this day because I'm sure somebody's going to ask me to do it. Here goes. 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1024, 2048, 4096, 8192, 16,384, 32,768, 65,536, 131,072, 262,144, 524,288, 1,048,576, 2,097,152, 4,194,304, 8,388,608, 16,777,216, 33,554,432, 67,108,664, 134,217,328. And I sort of lost count. Oh, 268,434,000 656, I guess. I lose count there because I only memorize up to the calculator, which had 8 digits, so I only memorized up to that. On car trips, I used to count the seconds of each trip in Roman numerals non-stop to the annoyance of anyone in earshot. I loved flipping through various math books, particularly those focused on arithmetic tricks. I taught myself that you can take squares of two-digit numbers by adding and subtracting the number being squared by the same amount, and then adding the square of this amount. For instance, the best way to square 88 would be to take 90 times 86, which is a lot faster to calculate, and adding 4, the square of the difference between 88 and 90, to obtain 7,740 plus 4 equals 7,744. Simultaneously, by the time I was 8 or so, I taught myself many other arithmetic tricks, some of which I discovered by myself and some of which I learned from various pop math books. I learned that the difference between each pair of squares always increased by 2. Algebraically, the difference between the square of x and the square of x minus 1 is always 2x minus 1, but I knew no algebra when I discovered this. Nonetheless, it was obvious to me just based on pattern recognition. 1 plus 3 equals 4, 1 plus 3 plus 5 equals 9, 1 plus 3 plus 5 plus 7 equals 16, and so on. Far before most of my peers, I learned the hexadecimal and octal numbering systems. Does anybody even use octal anymore? I don't think I've even heard about it in the last decade except that nerdity test. And even invented, in quotes, my own numbering systems, which was probably merely discovering other numeric bases which nobody uses for any practical purpose. Unlike Albert Tangora and the typists of his generation, it never occurred to me to type and do arithmetic in my head simultaneously, so I never learned that particular trick, even though I probably would have been able to do it. Throughout my grade school career, I would become much better known for my arithmetic abilities than my typing, even though my typing was obviously at a more elite level. In middle school, I set the all-time high score for the 6th grade honors math entrance exam and was tied for 22nd statewide on the New York Mathematics League contest in 7th grade, although many New York middle schools did not compete. Bizarrely and contrary to all stereotypical expectations, I built a sizable cult audience who would stop me in the halls between classes to answer arithmetic problems, usually but not always 2 by 2 multiplication problems, which I would often answer before they finished entering them into the calculator. Most of these people were not really friends and were not especially into academics either, but they seemed to unironically enjoy drilling me like I was performing some kind of magic trick or something. I may have been a freak, but I was their freak. Although I was utterly bemused by this and failed to understand it, I wrote it hard because at least it gave me some kind of recognition. I was certainly picked on a lot, but I was also strangely revered in an era when most class nerds weren't. I was so perilously unhip that I almost swung around to hip again. My accidental ability to attract attention caused me to be treated way better in grade school than most others of my ilk, and I felt deeply sorry for most of the other nerds in my class who were either entirely picked on or otherwise ignored. Despite going to the largest high school in the Syracuse metropolitan area with over 2,000 students, I led the school's math league team with ease, both as a junior and senior in 2002 and 2003. The senior who finished second to me in 2002 quipped that I was the only person he had ever met who typed more quickly than he talked, but I don't quite think that's accurate. My favorite event at Math League was the Buzz Contest, a spelling bee style sudden death elimination contest where students were forced to memorize certain words that we had to recite if a given number fit a certain mathematical property. For instance, you would recite a given word every time the next number was a triangle number, 1, 3, 6, 10, 15, etc., or in the Fibonacci sequence, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, etc. If the number did not meet the criteria of any of the associated words, you simply said the number instead, and you were never told the current number in advance either, so you had to keep track of it in your head at all times. I was one of 3 co-winners of the Buzz Contest countywide in 2002. We all went out on the same number. During this contest, my teammates and my advisor were amused by my intensity and claimed that I was giving my opponents, in quotes, death stares. I'm not typing tonight. And I'm also probably not streaming Nitro Tape. I'll record Nitro Tape, but Nitro Tape had a history of crashing my streams. It did not crash my recording, so I'll record it someday. I wasn't really a math genius. I was an maybe I was an arithmetic and algebra and to a lesser degree statistics genius, but geometry I was terrible at. Trigonometry I was mediocre. I didn't really have a good visual sense for viewing things visually, and when I got to Cornell, I got a D in a linear algebra class and had to repeat it. I was good at elementary level stuff, but I kind of lost it over the years. I was also successful in actual spelling bees. In my 4th grade spelling test, I spelled every word correctly for the entire year, but had the word unbeaten marked wrong because my teacher read the first E as an L because my cursive was so sloppy. I did not take it well. In 8th grade in 1999, the district spelling bee and that month's math league meet were held the same day in different schools, and I was perhaps surprisingly the only person who was trying to do both simultaneously. The top 10 in the district spelling bee advanced to the regional written test in Syracuse's Carousel Center, now Destiny, USA. So once I had made it to the next round, I contemplated intentionally misspelling a word so I could get to Math League sooner, but decided that would be stupid. I had been successful enough in Math League that the team waited for me to arrive to the meet already in progress rather than replacing me with a substitute. I won the bee, shuttled off to the other school, and like some conquering hero delivering plunder from war, I lay my spelling bee trophy upon the pedestal that was the Math League table. Of course I paid for my hubris by bombing out of the remainder of the Math League meet. I did go on to finish 6th in the Syracuse Regional Oral Spelling Bee, though. My math obsession caused me to be entranced by almost anything whatsoever containing numeric content. I would peruse every kind of reference book, almanacs, atlases, maps, computer manuals, and occasionally encyclopedias for hours. Most often I was obsessed by weights and measures and population tables, but I probably at some point read through most of the sections in the World Almanac, which was by far my favorite such reference. I never cared for the Guinness Book of World Records because while the World Almanac generally had useful information, I felt the Guinness Book had boring and trivial content in comparison. This caused me to be blissfully unaware of the past competitive typing records, so I never really had any awareness of them until I started taking typing seriously. My arguably becoming the fastest typist in the world was never at any moment a result of me wanting to become the fastest typist in the world, and that seems especially unusual. Um, I've had a couple of refurbished computers which were cheaper, and Nitro Tape is a very visually intense game. And my streams always crashed on my previous computer, and I saw that something similar was happening when I even tried to stream Type Racer here while chatting, and I was competing in the typing match. And I was even getting speed in like the 90 words per minute. So yeah, I would probably just record it. My Nitro Tape name, like everything else, is Arena Snow. This was a this was a very bad time to stream down to like 8 viewers. But I mean, people will still see this. Oh God, I've been on an hour and I was planning for a half hour. I'm not going to be reading much longer. I mean, I talk for several pages about my auto racing fandom. I'm going to skip that. I talk a little bit about um, philosophical, sociological things. I'm going to skip that too and try to just do the entertaining stuff. My thirst for quantitative minutiae also manifested itself in my watching and loving some of the most awful game shows like Press Your Luck, Shop Till You Drop, and Supermarket Sweep, and perhaps most horrifyingly, frequently watching the Bloomberg market updates at 5:30 on weekday mornings while I was an elementary school student. In my preteen years, I literally tallied the letter frequency of every letter used on every Wheel of Fortune puzzle for months. Because so much quantitative data is tied up in economics and high finance, there was a real chance I could have ended up as a stockbroker or something, particularly after I majored in economics at Cornell. However, despite my voracious appetite for data in all forms, I really wasn't very cutthroat except in nerdy competitions, and I definitely lacked the consumerist drive of most of my peers, so I never would have fit into such a dog-eat-dog world. Although I was capable of being very intense, for the most part I was an extremely laid-back dude who took life pretty leisurely while alone. Yeah, just look at my typing videos. Although my favorite and best subjects throughout grade school were always math and history, my dream for most of my early childhood was to become a TV weatherman. I had also dreamt of becoming a firefighter, astronaut, and T-ball coach, but none of those were remotely realistic, particularly considering all the non-academic skills I lacked. I would watch the Weather Channel for hours each day for most of my elementary school years. The tropical updates and local weather updates most compelled me. To this day, am still nostalgic for the lo-fi block lettering and the funky pseudo-ambient music that were used on the Weather Channel's late 80s local weather updates. I memorized all the Atlantic hurricane names, even those that went unused for several years running in the 90s, and even wrote an abysmal short story called The National Hurricane Center, where anthropomorphized hurricanes conversed in the sky. However, my passion was not that lasting, as once I got a mere C on a meteorology exam in earth science, way lower than my usual grades, I abruptly decided it wasn't for me. It was a blessing in disguise, I suppose, because I really did not anticipate the degradation of the media in the 20 years since. All the local weathercasters now seem to be little more than cheerleaders for the hottest and sunniest weather possible, even when it is unseasonably so, as if this is what everybody wants. I personally have been sensitive to heat and especially sunlight throughout my life, and always preferred overcast days in the 60s and 70s degrees Fahrenheit. From my memory, Syracuse used to have many more days like that in my childhood than it does today. Yeah, all right. People are dropping out. So, um, most of what I talk after this is like auto racing stuff that won't interest people as much and sociological observations. So, all right, I'm just gonna read 2 more pages about um, the Scrabble group I was in as a kid, and leave the rest for the publication. Um, when I was 8 years old in January 1994, I became the youngest member ever of the Mensa Scrabble by Mail Sig, breaking the record of 12-year-old Robert Slavin, who later went on to become a 5-time Jeopardy champion. I was never a Mensa member, but both of my parents were. By the time I joined, members were no longer required to also be Mensa members. My mom was regarded as one of the top 3 players in this group in the late 70s and rejoined in my early childhood. Before I was even a member of the group, I voraciously read the newsletters and opened my mom's games before she even did and tried to look for plays. When I once found a better play than she did, she got annoyed and asked me if I would like to play my own games instead. I agreed, although I had no interest in joining Mensa. I really couldn't afford it, and especially in recent years, as I have come to think that IQ is meaningless, I'm not particularly interested. I inspired several other adult members to force their basically uninterested children into games over the next year or two, and they were all matched with me, but I was beating them all so badly before the games were half over that they all dropped their games, and one opponent's mother accused my mom of making the plays for me, which was not the case. While none of those other kids ever finished a game, I remained heavily active, volunteering to be the group's statistician in 1999 when I was 14, and greatly expanded a column that had until then been between 5 and 7 pages to a regular 20-page column every other month. I included numerous new statistical categories that none of the previous statisticians had thought to consider, including winning streaks, upsets, high-scoring non-bingo plays, players who led the game start to finish, and play-by-play commentaries for certain games. I also rapidly improved as a player in this period, becoming a top 10 player by the time I quit for several years to focus on college. I beat Dick Lazaro, the 1986 Florida State Scrabble champion and perennial #1 player for most of the late 90s, early 2000s, 6 times in 7 games while still in high school. Most of the real heavy hitters in the group, like Peter Morris, the first World Scrabble champion, Chuck Armstrong, who won more tournaments than any other Scrabble player in history, and Bob Lipton, who finished third in the U.S. Nationals in 1994 and third in the World Championship in 1995, were long gone by the time of my ascent, so it did feel somewhat more hollow. What made these achievements far less remarkable was the fact that by the mid-90s we were all allowed to use word-finding computers in our games, and I, like all the other top players, did, so I did not memorize as many words as I otherwise could have. While I did go on to play tournaments much later, I now acknowledge the two barely had anything to do with each other at all, except that I do think Scrabble by Mail probably helped me slightly in developing a strategic sense that I could apply to tournaments. My participation in this group also was probably the first time I really socialized with people outside my home and school environment. And I'm going to stop there. There was much more than this. I probably read between a third and a half of it. Oh, my Nitro Tape channel. All right, I'll go on there, but I'm not putting a screen up, and warning, it might crash the stream. I thought it was Nitro Tape / Arena Snow. I think it used to be, but now I think I have a number. Oh, right, because I log in with Facebook now. That's the number 400731. That's the number of my account. My account doesn't have a name. I just log in from my Facebook. Wow, you've raced Jelani. I've barely raced Jelani live. Um, I think the only time I raced Jelani live was during a 2011 Type Racer Championship when I invited him back. We used to compete for records, but back in late 2009, early 2010, but we weren't in the same races, hardly ever. Yes, I certainly remember Jelani. He was a big rival for me from 2008 to 2010. Um, I definitely overtook Jelani in 2010. He had better things to do with his time, his computer science research. I did not. I was unemployed at the time, so yeah, that's good. That's good accuracy. Um, oh, you mean you've raced Jelani's ghost? Jelani didn't have any ghosts though because he stopped competing before Ghost started. Um, I was never really that into chess. I probably only played like 20 or 30 games of chess in my life. Um, I'm limited to the amount of friends Song Plague, I'm limited to the amount of friends I have. I used to indiscriminately add everybody, and then it told me I was only allowed to have like 3,000 or 500 friends or something. I don't know if I can add anybody else. Fine, I switched to allow all for the moment, but I'm getting off in a minute or two. No, I've only raced Jelani like 4 times ever on Type Racer. Yeah, good luck on improving Infamous. That's very fast, and I'm going to. I think it was only the 500. It's much easier to be accurate on. It's much easier to be an accurate typist than to be an accurate steno guy. So yes, I did beat Mark all 3 times on Inner Steno that we both competed. Um, he beat me in gross speed once or twice, but I beat him in net speed all 3 times because he made many more errors all 3 years than I did. Yeah, I guess you predate me on Type Racer. Zen chess. You're really good if you beat Jelani a fifth of the time back then. I don't see your friend request yet, and I'm going to get off the screen and only type things after this. Um, this is not exactly an exciting stream at this point. Yeah, Jelani was great. He ended up doing something better. I mean, I'd happily trade spots with him, but I wouldn't want to do that to him because he's had a pretty glorious adulthood, and aside from the typing, I haven't. The other guy was Dan Chen, Yifei Chen, but yeah, getting off. Too many things at once. But I'll still. I don't see your friend request yet. Oh, okay, now I see the friend request. Sorry. Okay, I accepted your friend request, Divine Madness. I accepted its Divine Madness. Sorry, Zambrix, I'm just about to get off in like 30 seconds, but I really should be sleeping because I need to get groceries tomorrow. And it should be early so I don't catch COVID. And it's already like late. Yes, I accepted the friend request and now I'm getting off.